Okay, so let's jump right in.
Yes.
So last week we spoke about the three box solution, which is about balancing three boxes, managing the present, creating the future, and forgetting the past. Now, one of the things I spoke about was exploit and explore, which is exploit is about managing the present, explore is creating the future, and we can think of expunge as the third E, right, which is really about forgetting the
Mm.
past. Now, between the three, organizations predominantly operate in exploit, right? We hear things like efficiency, doing things faster, cheaper, headcount reduction, operational excellence, what have you, right? So that's all part of exploit. We see some bit of explore, which is really about creativity, innovation, non-linear ideas, but expunge or letting go of some of the assumptions, right? That I think determines the level of explore that a company does. It's about embracing new ideas, new way of doing things. That is something that improves effectiveness, not just efficiency.
Yeah, I mean, totally. I love the way the three E's connect here. Sometimes we do think about exploit as a negative terminology, but it's also about creating the scene for exploration. I'm actually thinking about something that happened with John Deere, the farm equipment and construction equipment company. So there
Right.
was this purchase executive, in the early 2000s, a person called John Stegner. He was very sure that decentralized procurement systems were making purchasing highly inefficient. But he was like, he knew that if he just walked in and presented data, it might not cut the ice at all. And not only did he believe that decentralization was highly inefficient for procurement, he also believed that the centralized system could cost way lesser and they could save about $1 billion US over a 5 year period. Now he was hemming and hawing. The divisional VPs would think of it as loss of turf, that somebody's taking away something so precious that they controlled. So he decided to do, instead of, jumping in with data, he decided to focus on one item, and he got an intern to collect samples of rubberized gloves from about 14 factories, and where different processes like welding, assembly, etc. were used. The intern collected about 424 different gloves. And not only were they different gloves for this one, the same gloves bought from the same vendor in different factories were at different prices. And the price differential was not even less. It was like $4 to $17 kind of a difference. And what they did was, together they tagged all the gloves with the vendor, price, factory, everything, and displayed it on the boardroom table for all the divisional VPs to come and then take the conclusion themselves. The divisional VPs walk in, look at this boardroom table with all these gloves, and their jaws dropped. And then he made a presentation about how the saving could be there. And so actually a conversation around exploitation and looking at efficiency led to expunging some of it. They reduced the 424 gloves to 24, 6 vendors to one vendor, and the intern very happily also got a job offer to be there. So I think those three is lovelily connected there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and they say seeing is believing, right? So this is a great example of that. When you see something, I believe, I probably once they saw it, that kind of helped, kind of challenge the assumptions that they were holding on to, right?
Yeah, totally. How do you see it playing now in the current context, Suman?
So let's take something that's affecting all of us right now, right? Which is the return to office policy.
Hmm.
Now, while some companies are allowing remote working, some are insisting on returning to office. Spoken to many leaders on this, they will tell you why it's important to be back at office full time like good old days, right?
Hmm.
Why the virtual model will not work, not even a hybrid model. Now, that thinking, that kind of thinking of the leader is based on their reality. But
Hmm.
end of the day, it's an assumption. and they need to challenge those assumptions. Let's see, it's an I keep saying post pandemic, it's not a new normal, it's a new world. If you hold on to these assumptions, what happens is you want to go back to exactly the way things were, right? And sometimes you also see them grudgingly allowing it because others are doing it, because sometimes there's no other way out. But as long as you don't really embrace it and doing it grudgingly, what happens is they remain suspicious of people who are remote, right? So you're not really changing the mindset. And for such a manager who can't trust his people who are not in front, I have this one question for them. You expect your customers to trust you who are sitting on the other side of the world, and yet you can't trust your people unless they're sitting right under your nose. Yeah? Does that
No,
make
totally.
sense?
Yeah, yeah, no, totally. I think especially in the hybrid world, or when we have to let go of our limiting beliefs, our old assumptions, and, very, very simply, even some of these, just letting go has let the door open for immense creativity and innovation about how we do things. I was actually thinking about this friend of mine. I was visiting them in the US in January, and they didn't get a standing desk. They used an ironing board as a standing desk. Now, in any other time, nobody would have ever thought of using an ironing board at home as a standing desk. They just kept adjusting the height of the ironing board. And I think
Okay.
some of these creativity things which people are capable of, that's what, in some ways being rigid about policies, we are from them. So, I mean, I want to explore this assumptions bit that you talked about a little bit more, Suman. I mean, what are some of the other assumptions that are holding back organizations?
So there are, so let's take a few examples. So let's say I'm in a company where we are one of the industry leaders, right? So the assumption that I'm holding in my head is that we are leaders in the industry. What that could do potentially is limit learning, limit partnering, limit risk taking for an organization.
Hmm.
Maybe I have an assumption that, you know what, even though our market share is dwindling, but we have some loyal customers, and at least, we can expect business from them. The moment we have that kind of thinking, it limits focus on new customers. It's also about, the mindset of which industry you're in, because the things are changing so rapidly. So let's say automotive business, right? Um, Now, if I'm in the automotive business and my mindset is, hey, we are in the automotive business and we essentially need automotive people, it limits hiring for different skills, right?
Hmm.
So, for instance, today Tesla is really more in the technology business, and so is Kia and Hyundai when it comes to EV. So, a good case study for this is Volvo, which recently reinvented itself through hiring. See, what
Hmm.
happened with Volvo was very interesting. It was caught in the middle. It didn't match up with luxury brands like Mercedes and BMW. Yet it lacked the capacity to compete with mass market leaders, right, like Toyota and Honda.
Hmm.
So what they did is they did a lot of soul searching. They said, once you needed mechanical engineers, today there is a bigger need for software engineers. So they started hiring from diverse backgrounds and industries. Marketers
Hmm.
from Google, who transformed Volvo's use of technology and social media. They hired engineers from Nokia to redesign their radio navigation systems. Just look at the way they were thinking, right? They even looked at craftsmen from the fashion industry and designers. They
Right.
brought all these people together. Now, it might seem easy. One might think, hey, it's just hiring, but bringing in diverse folks, as diverse as these, integrating them, making everything work in tandem is harder said than done, right? It's really about changing the culture of the place.
Oh,
And today it's and today its cars are winning rave reviews. I mean, there's a model called the XC90, which their SUV. That's one of them. It's got huge accolades. So they've really transformed the organization and doing also as we speak. And all that was possible because they let go of some certain assumptions that were very rigidly held in the company.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm totally, absolutely relating to it, especially during the pandemic as well. We've seen, like we said, competitors collaborating. I'm thinking about McDonald's and Aldi, which is a supermarket in Aldi or Aldi, I don't know how it is pronounced, but it's in Germany. So McDonald's was like, obviously the restaurant business was severely affected during the pandemic, and there were going to be huge job losses and layoffs and all that. But they were able to actually save their people because of some innovative thinking. Aldi needed workforce. They were a grocery chain. They were facing workforce shortage. So instead of just letting go of people, McDonald's and Aldi reached an agreement where McDonald's staff could work for the grocery chain on a voluntary basis. So this created temporary employment, saved the jobs, and what they did very uniquely was that the McDonald's employees were free to return to their parent company once things changed. So it was an absolute win-win solution for both of them. And the other point that, I mean, what you were talking about, automotive business and all that, DBS, the bank, always says that they're not a bank. They are actually a technology company, act less like a bank and more like a tech company. And they did at one point of time when they had their whole digital, they were voted the world's best digital bank by Euromoney 3 times and all that. They actually wanted to become the D in Gandalf of Google, Amazon, Netflix, DBS, Apple, LinkedIn, and Facebook. They really thought that they were going to become that. So, which was a total rethink of how you think yourself as a bank.
Very true, very true. In fact, that this entire thing of competing versus collaborating, I think there are two completely opposing mindsets, right?
Mm.
One is competing, whereas everything is hush hush, it's about secrecy, and the same company is having to collaborate, which is really about cooperation and information sharing, right? Diametrically opposite. And since we're talking of automotive industry, I can think about something which is happening right here in India, which is Maruti collaborating with Toyota, right? Who would have thought about it even 5 years
Right.
ago? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Sonali, I mean, maybe you can talk a bit about we were talking about this before the call. So, why don't you talk about the failures of how company handle failures and what can we learn about letting go from that?
Right, right. No, no, and absolutely. I mean, Jeff Bezos famously said, if the size of your failures isn't growing, you're not going to be inventing at a size that can actually move the needle. And one of the things that happens with failures, and Tom Fishburne, who writes this column called Marketoonist, he does these wonderful, wonderful cartoons. And anybody, if you have not been exposed to his work, should go and look him up. He used to work with General Mills many years back, and one of the failed new products was a snack called Wahoos, and it flopped like really badly. But rather than talk openly about the lessons that they learned from it, Wahoos became a sort of a Voldemort kind of a code word, the product that shall not be named kind of a thing. So, and the fear of creating another Wahoo stifled every other innovation that was possible in the company, not not by trying to avoid the same mistakes, but by avoiding ambitious innovation totally. So we really need to go beyond thinking that the word failure is like a black mark, kala daga and dabba and all that, and come to accept that failure is a natural byproduct when we are innovating, when we are taking risks. So mistakes should not get brushed under the rug. They do double harm when you do that. First, when you do the mistake, and then again, every time someone makes the same mistake, they don't learn because they've not learned from the first error. So I was actually reading, Shrikant had done a post on something, and he talked about one of these books by John is secrets that you must discover before you die. And they interviewed these people from 50 years to 106 years and found out that people don't regret their failures. They regret they had not more. We really make let go of our fear of failure, and this is something I think that came up last week as well. So and I'm just looking at some of the comments as well, and I think that's the real beauty of looking at examples like the Volvo one that you're sharing and all that, looking at how can we make it relatable in the organizations for people to learn from it.
Right, right, absolutely. No, that's a great example. And I think that's, that organizational memory, let's say they've tried something and it has not worked.
Hmm.
That can, and if you hold on to that assumption, which is often which organizations do, it stifles further innovation, right? A new person who comes in with lots of ideas, when they suggest, they say, no, 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 it doesn't work here. We've tried it before. Believe me, it won't work, right? So
Hmm.
you're essentially holding on to that assumption, even though the needs, the market, the environment may have changed completely.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's also partly about letting go of that perfectionist mindset. I was speaking to somebody today who was like saying that, I know I want to be a young person who's like getting into the work life and all that. And she was just saying that I know that I should be writing more on LinkedIn and putting myself out there, but I keep spending my time trying to create that perfect post, ensuring that it's fine. And I just had to stop and tell that it's fine. One, in social media the memory is what it is, and second, it's not the last one. You'll have 9,000 other posts to write and evolve and learn. So why are we clinging to getting to perfection? And I always talk about iPhone, release at 80%, and then you can look at setting all the updates later. The other part that really I think organizations could look at doing is regularly organizing fail fests, trying to get rid of the stigma of failure in the organization by having them talk about failures very publicly. This is true for large organizations like NASA, where, if people didn't share about what happened and why things failed, there are humongous repercussions. And equally to all of us about things that go wrong. If we don't let go of that fear to speak about it, we are not helping ourselves and we are not helping others.
No, I completely agree. I especially like that perfectionism example, right?
Mm.
Because that's an assumption that we have, right? That it needs to be exactly perfect. In fact, I get reminded of that quote that great is the enemy of the good, right?
Mm.
We're trying to make something great, but essentially, uh, it backfires, right? And we see this perfectionism thing being very common. I myself to blame quite often. Sometimes I have to just pull back and say, you know what, maybe good enough is good enough. Let's get it out.
Totally,
Yeah.
totally. And I think organizations need to create that memory, actually collect those examples of failures, have those discussions, and do it really openly without any stigma. I know that some of these radically different organizations do it, but it's still not the norm. And leaders need to really set the trend.
Totally agree. Totally agree. Okay, so I just asked if there are any questions from any of the listeners. We'll be happy to respond or maybe share your perspective. Yeah, we just kind of a minute out, but Saundari, anything else you would like to add before we wrap up?
I think it's a great topic in terms of. I'm sure a lot of people will have issues about letting go, both at the individual level, at an in an organization when you're just new into the organization, when you're a slightly more mature in the organization, and equally. So when you're mature in the organization, how can you also help the organization deal with it better? How can we set the trend, be the change that we want to see?
Absolutely. And I think one thing it will be good to for all of us to remember is what we feel our reality is really an assumption. End of the day, everything is an assumption. So if you are justifying to ourselves saying this is real, this is reality, that's only an assumption which is true from your lens, maybe not from somebody else. And once we do that, we will be able to challenge those assumptions and see whether they still are valid, in today's day and age where the world has dramatically undergone sea change. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
No,
So I think, sorry, you saying something?
no, no. I was just thanking you. Thanks for the platform and thanks for, involving me in the conversation. I think it's been great learning.